When a man stops communicating, the first thing that happens inside a woman's mind is confusion. She begins to replay every little detail of the last conversation you had together. Maybe you didn't even think twice about the way you ended the call or how short your text was before you went quiet, but she notices. She notices because she's wired to pick up on the subtleties of connection. If you stop communicating, she doesn't just assume you're busy. She asks herself if she said something wrong, if she came across too eager, or if she revealed too much too soon. This is where self-doubt begins to creep in. It's not that she doesn't trust herself, but when the silence lingers, her brain fills in the blanks. And the blanks usually aren't flattering. She starts scrolling through her memory like a movie reel, pausing at every scene where she thinks she may have given the wrong impression. Did I laugh too loud? Was I too available? Did I come across as needy? These aren't random thoughts. They're triggered because silence creates a vacuum. And when there's no reassurance, no sign of interest, the vacuum gets filled with doubt. Now, I want you to imagine this for a moment. A woman who, just yesterday, was feeling confident about the connection she had with you suddenly feels like she's lost her footing. One moment, she's telling her friends how great the chemistry felt, and the next she's wondering if she misread the whole thing. That swing from certainty to confusion isn't small. It's emotional whiplash, and it happens because communication is the bridge that tells her she's safe in the connection. When that bridge collapses, she feels stranded, not knowing whether she's waiting for someone who's still invested, or whether she's the only one left on the island. What's interesting is that many men assume silence communicates strength or mystery, like pulling back somehow makes them more desirable. But what's actually happening is the opposite. Instead of creating intrigue, it creates anxiety. Instead of making her chase, it makes her question if she should walk away. Because no matter how confident a woman is in her life, when she feels invested in someone, she wants to know where she stands. And if she doesn't, that very confidence starts turning against her. She'll think, if I were really worth it, he wouldn't have gone quiet on me. And here's the irony. The very thing you think makes you look independent or laid back is the thing that makes her start pulling back emotionally. Because silence doesn't just make her question you. It makes her question herself. And when a woman starts questioning herself around you, that's when attraction slowly gets replaced by unease. No one wants to stay in a space where they constantly feel unsure, and women are no different. I've spoken to countless women who've shared how exhausting this cycle feels. They don't just sit around waiting for texts. They get on with their lives, they go to work, they laugh with their friends. But in the quiet moments, when their phone is in their hand, that silence echoes. It makes them wonder why someone who seemed so interested suddenly feels so far away. And even if they don't say it out loud, inside, there's this nagging question: what changed? Think about how powerful that is. With just a lack of communication, you can make someone who was feeling excited, open, and connected suddenly feel like they've made a mistake. You can turn anticipation into second guessing. And once that seed of self-doubt is planted, it doesn't just affect how she sees you. It affects how she feels about herself. That's the real cost of going silent. And the truth is, women aren't looking for constant reassurance every second of the day. They don't need endless calls or hour-long texts. What they do need is consistency. They need to know that if you were excited yesterday, that excitement hasn't evaporated overnight. They need to feel that if you say you're interested, you'll back it up with your actions. Because when you disappear without explanation, It doesn't just feel like a break in communication. It feels like a break in trust. So when you stop communicating, remember this: what she's secretly thinking isn't just, why hasn't he called? It's, am I not enough? And that question, left unanswered, is the very thing that can make her walk away. When communication begins to fade, when those messages that once came easily start to slow down or disappear altogether, one of the first conclusions a woman will draw is that you're no longer interested. It may not be the truth, but silence rarely gets interpreted as anything else. And here's the important part: she doesn't usually arrive at that thought after weeks of deep reflection. It happens quickly, almost instinctively, because she knows from experience that when someone is truly interested, they make an effort. They don't vanish without explanation. You see, when you stop reaching out, she doesn't just think you're busy. She thinks you're done. She thinks you've already made your decision, and without saying a word, you're showing her that she's not worth the energy anymore. It's not bitterness, it's self-protection. Because she's been told before, in 100 subtle ways, that if someone wants to be with her, she won't have to wonder. So the moment she feels neglected, her brain fills in the story, you've lost interest. This is why silence is so dangerous. It doesn't just create uncertainty, it creates assumptions. And assumptions have a way of solidifying into beliefs very quickly. A woman who once felt hopeful about you starts telling herself, if he cared, he'd be here. And the more she repeats that, the more it becomes her reality. She might have felt butterflies just a few days ago, but those same butterflies now get crushed under the weight of disappointment. What's often misunderstood is that women don't need constant attention. They don't need a text every hour. They don't need someone who has nothing else going on in their life. What they do need is a sign that your interest hasn't evaporated. That could be as simple as checking in, or a short message that says you're thinking of her. When those small but consistent efforts are missing, she doesn't think, oh, he's giving me space. She thinks, he's moved on. And here's the thing: once she believes you've lost interest, she starts to detach. She's not going to chase endlessly. She's not going to beg for attention. Instead, she'll quietly recalibrate her energy. Maybe she starts pulling back emotionally. Maybe she begins to invest her time in people who actually show up. And by the time you decide to reappear, you may find the window has closed. Not because she never cared, but because she taught herself not to care anymore. I want you to picture what's happening on her end during that silence. She's sitting with her phone, not hearing from you, and her mind begins to race. She remembers the effort you put in at the beginning, the way you made her feel special, the spark you created together, and now she's looking at the absence of all of that. It feels like a contradiction, and contradictions are painful. The simplest explanation she can come up with is that you were never really serious to begin with, and even if you were, she'll believe you changed your mind. Because in her world, interest looks like action, and disinterest looks like silence. Men often underestimate how quickly a woman can shift from hope to closure. The same woman who was excitedly telling her best friend about you a week ago could be telling that same friend she's done, simply because your communication stopped. That's how powerful consistency is. And when that consistency disappears, she doesn't wait around endlessly trying to decode it. She takes it as the answer you didn't have the courage to say out loud. What's fascinating is that many men assume their silence is neutral, that it simply means, I'm busy, or I need space. But from her perspective, silence isn't neutral, it's negative. It doesn't feel like space, it feels like rejection. It doesn't feel like patience. It feels like indifference. And indifference is one of the hardest feelings to recover from because it makes her feel invisible. So, when communication breaks, what she's secretly thinking is not just, where did he go? It's, he doesn't want me anymore? And once that thought takes root, it doesn't matter how charming you were, how much chemistry you shared, or how strong the connection once felt. Silence speaks louder than all of it. When communication starts to fade, something subtle but powerful begins to happen inside a woman. At first, she might brush it off. Maybe you're busy, maybe you're distracted, maybe it's just a temporary lull. But as the silence stretches, she starts to protect herself. She doesn't necessarily announce it. She doesn't always confront it, but she begins to quietly pull back emotionally. Because for her, communication isn't just about words, it's about connection. It's the reassurance that the energy she's giving is being matched, that the feelings she's opening herself up to are safe in your hands. When that disappears, it feels risky to keep investing. You see, trust isn't built through grand gestures, it's built in the day-to-day consistency. A message that says, I'm thinking of you. A call that shows up even when life is busy. These small things tell her, you can lean into this, you can open your heart here. When those signals vanish, her instinct is to step back. Not because she doesn't care anymore, but because caring now feels dangerous. If she continues to give her energy while you go quiet, she risks feeling foolish, like she's holding onto something that's already slipping through her fingers. This is why you'll often see a shift in her behavior when communication drops. She's not as playful in her replies. She's slower to engage. The warmth you once felt from her begins to cool, not because she wants it to, but because she feels she has to. It's her way of balancing the scales. If you're pulling away, she thinks, then I should pull away too. And once she gets used to that distance, it becomes harder for her to come back. It's easy to misinterpret this as indifference. You might think, she must not have cared that much if she can just switch off like that. But what you're actually seeing is a defense mechanism. A woman who feels shut out emotionally will often start building walls of her own. She tells herself not to expect much, not to get her hopes up, not to keep investing in something that feels uncertain. And those walls aren't easy to break down once they're up. Imagine how it feels for her. She went from sharing her thoughts openly, laughing freely, feeling excited about where things were going, to suddenly, guessing every bit of vulnerability she showed. That shift is painful. It feels like the rug has been pulled out from under her. So to protect herself from further disappointment, she withdraws. She creates emotional distance to soften the blow of what she suspects might already be happening. You pulling away for good. This is the part most men don't see. They assume their silence is harmless, that disappearing for a while won't have much impact. But in reality, that silence can change the entire dynamic. It forces her to recalibrate. Where once she felt secure, she now feels exposed. Where once she leaned in, she now leans back. And once she's adjusted to that distance, establishing closeness becomes a far greater challenge. The irony is that many men pull back as a way of testing the connection. They want to see if she'll chase, if she'll prove her interest. But what actually happens is the opposite. She stops chasing, not because she doesn't care, but because chasing someone who isn't showing up makes her feel undervalued. Her emotional withdrawal isn't proof she never cared. It's proof she's protecting her heart from being hurt by caring too much. Think about it this way: connection is like a fire. It burns when both people are adding wood to it consistently. When you stop contributing, the fire doesn't go out immediately, it dims slowly. And during that dimming, she's watching closely. She notices the lack of warmth, and before the fire completely burns out, she pulls back to keep from freezing in the cold. By the time you decide to show up again, you may find yourself standing in front of ashes, wondering where the spark went. The reality is, when you stop communicating, what she's secretly thinking isn't just, "Why hasn't he called?" It's, "I can't afford to keep giving my heart if he's not giving his." And that thought, once it takes hold, is what makes her start letting go. When the communication stops, another thing that quietly begins to play out in a woman's mind is comparison. She might not want to go there, but the silence almost pushes her into that space. Suddenly, she starts wondering if your attention is going somewhere else, if someone else has stepped into the space she thought she had with you. And even if there isn't another person in the picture, the absence of reassurance makes her imagination run wild. She begins to ask questions she can't answer. Is he losing interest because of me? Or is there someone who excites him more? This isn't about jealousy for the sake of jealousy. It's about insecurity that grows in the silence. When there's no communication, she has no evidence to feel safe. So instead of clarity, her mind feeds her possibilities, often the worst ones. And once those thoughts begin, they can spiral. She'll compare herself not just to real women in your life, but to imaginary ones too. The co-worker you once mentioned, the friend who likes your posts, even the stranger she's never met, but pictures in her head. Silence gives room for those insecurities to breathe, and they rarely paint her in the best light. Now here's the important part. It's not that she doesn't think highly of herself. Many women who experience this are confident, successful, and self-aware. But confidence doesn't erase vulnerability. When someone she's emotionally invested in suddenly goes quiet, that confidence wavers. She starts to think, if I were really enough, why would he stop showing up? Why would he disappear if I truly mattered? Those questions cut deeper than most men realize, because they don't just reflect how she sees you. They reflect how she starts to see herself. And here's the danger. Once insecurity creeps in, it changes the way she behaves. Instead of being open and carefree with you, she might become more guarded. Instead of showing excitement, she might hold back because she doesn't want to give too much to someone who might already be giving his energy to someone else. In her effort to protect herself, she starts dimming the very qualities that made her magnetic in the first place. I've spoken to women who've admitted that during this silence, they begin to measure themselves against an invisible standard. They'll think back to their last interaction with you and ask, was I fun enough? Did I keep his attention? Was I attractive enough in that moment? The truth is, none of these questions are rooted in reality. They're rooted in fear. But fear feels real in the moment. And without communication, fear is all she has to guide her. It's important to realize that communication doesn't just nurture closeness, it shields against unnecessary doubt. When you're present, when you're consistent, she doesn't have to question whether she's competing for your attention. She can relax in the connection, knowing she's valued. But when you go silent, that security is replaced by a haunting sense of competition, even if no one else is in the race. And think about the weight of that. A woman who once felt cherished and certain now feels like she's in an invisible contest she never signed up for. She starts comparing herself to women she's never met, to past relationships you might have had, even to imagined scenarios she creates in her head. And the longer she sits in that silence, the harder it becomes for her to shake those comparisons. This is why silence doesn't just create distance, it erodes trust. Not because she believes you've done something wrong, but because the lack of communication forces her to fill in the blanks herself. And the blanks her mind creates are rarely flattering. Instead of thinking, he's busy, she thinks, he's bored. Instead of thinking, he'll call when he can, she thinks, he's calling someone else. That shift changes the whole way she looks at the connection. And here's the irony, sometimes the man is just genuinely busy or distracted or dealing with his own world. He thinks it's harmless, but the effect of that silence is far from harmless, because what she's secretly thinking during those quiet stretches isn't just, why haven't I heard from him? It's, am I being replaced? And once that thought takes root, it's very hard to undo. When a woman feels the silence growing, when the communication that once felt so natural begins to disappear, something shifts in her approach. Instead of chasing answers, instead of endlessly reaching out to fill the gap, many women will start to mirror the very behavior that's causing them confusion. It's not always because they want to, but because they feel they have to. Pulling back becomes her way of testing the boundaries, her way of seeing if the connection means enough to you that you'll notice her absence. This isn't a game, even though from the outside it might look like one. It's a survival strategy. She's thinking, if I keep giving and he's not showing up, I'm just setting myself up to get hurt. So she decides to create space, not because she wants distance, but because she wants clarity. She wants to see if her silence registers with you the same way your silence registered with her. Will you reach out when she stops? Will you notice that she's gone quiet? Will you care enough to close the gap? Now, this moment is critical because it reveals the dynamic between the two of you. If she pulls back and you step forward, she learns something important. That the connection still matters to you, that you're not going to let it slip away. But if she pulls back and you stay gone, she learns something else entirely. She learns that the silence was never temporary, it was the truth of how invested you really were. And once she learns that, she doesn't need to keep guessing. The tricky part is that from your perspective, her withdrawal might look like disinterest. You might think, she's cold now, she's not as engaged, she must not care as much as I thought she did. But what you're actually seeing is a woman protecting herself, waiting to see if you'll step up. She's giving you the space to prove that your words and your actions are aligned. And until you do, she's not going to make herself vulnerable by doing all the work. I've seen this play out so many times. At first, she was the one initiating, the one showing excitement, the one keeping the connection alive. But after a while, the imbalance became too heavy. She started to feel like she was carrying it alone. So instead of exhausting herself, she puts the ball in your court. If you want her, if you value her, now is the time you'll show it. And if you don't, she'll take the silence as her answer. The fascinating part is that this shift often happens quietly. She doesn't announce it. She doesn't say, I'm going to stop texting to see if you'll notice. She just does it. And while you're sitting there thinking everything is fine, she's already observing, already deciding what your lack of response means. That silence, for her, becomes data. It tells her whether the connection is mutual or one-sided. And women don't forget how it feels when their silence is met with more silence. From her perspective, if you truly care, you'll bridge the distance. You'll notice the energy has changed, and you'll want to do something about it. But if you don't, she concludes that you were never really invested in the first place. Or that conclusion doesn't usually come with anger. It comes with resignation. She doesn't need to fight. She doesn't need to beg. She doesn't need to convince. She simply accepts that your lack of pursuit is the answer she was looking for. This is where many men lose out without even realizing it. They think she lost interest, when in reality she was waiting to see if he would step up. She was testing, not to play games, but to protect her heart. And because he didn't notice or didn't act, she closed the door in her mind. By the time he comes back around, she's already decided that the silence told her everything she needed to know. So when a woman mirrors your silence, don't mistake it for indifference. What she's secretly thinking is, if he wants me, he'll show me. And if you don't, she won't wait forever. She'll take that silence as your final answer. At the heart of it all, what women want more than anything when communication stops is clarity. Not perfection, not constant attention, not even endless reassurance, just clarity. Because silence, as simple as it might seem from your side, creates a storm on hers. It leaves her with questions she can't answer and emotions she doesn't know where to place. And no matter how strong or independent she is, no one enjoys living in uncertainty. Here's what happens when you go quiet. She starts trying to interpret the silence. She looks for patterns in your behavior, searching for meaning in the absence of words. Was the last thing you said a sign you were pulling away? Was that short reply meant to be the beginning of the end? Is your silence just about being busy, or does it mean you've lost interest completely? None of these questions have answers, but she'll ask them anyway because the alternative, simply waiting without explanation, feels unbearable. And this is why honesty matters so much. Even if the truth is difficult, even if it risks disappointing her, she would rather know where she stands than spend her days trying to read between the lines of nothing. A woman can handle the truth. What she struggles to handle is the uncertainty that comes from silence. It's the not knowing that wears her down, because it forces her to carry the weight of two realities, one where you still care and one where you don't. And that tension leaves her drained, anxious, and often ready to walk away just to find peace. I want you to imagine what it feels like for her. One version of her day, she tells herself, "He's probably just tied up with work. He'll reach out soon." That calms her for a moment. But then another version of her voice says, "If he cared, he'd find a moment. Maybe he's already lost interest." And now she's back in the spiral, bouncing between hope and doubt. This emotional back and forth doesn't come from neediness. It comes from a lack of clarity. If she had the truth, even if it wasn't what she wanted to hear, she could ground herself and move forward. That's what so many men misunderstand. They think silence spares her feelings. They think disappearing gradually is somehow gentler than saying outright, "I don't feel the same anymore." But in reality, silence hurts more because it forces her to write her own painful story without knowing which parts are true. And when someone has to write their own story about why you're not showing up, they usually make themselves the villain in it. They decide they weren't good enough, that they weren't worth the effort, or that they were foolish to believe in the connection in the first place. But if you tell her the truth, if you give her clarity, even if it stings in the moment, she can respect it. She can process it. She can move on without losing herself in the process. And that's the crucial difference. Silence makes her question her value. Honesty allows her to keep her dignity. Think of the strongest relationships, the ones that lasted or even the ones that ended respectfully. What they have in common isn't that they were without conflict or without difficult moments. It's that there was honesty. Communication, even when it was hard, built trust. Silence, on the other hand, destroys it. And once trust is gone, it's almost impossible to rebuild. So when you pull back, what she's secretly hoping for isn't endless explanations or apologies. She's not looking for poetry or excuses dressed up as stories. She just wants to know the truth. She wants to know where she stands, even if where she stands isn't where she hoped she'd be. Because clarity, even when it hurts, gives her power. It allows her to decide what to do next instead of being stuck in limbo, endlessly waiting for something that may never come. That's why the most respectful thing you can ever give a woman is your honesty. If you care, show it. If you're unsure, say it. If you're done, own it. What she can't handle is silence, because silence robs her of the one thing she needs most, the chance to decide for herself what comes next. And in the end, what she's secretly thinking when you stop communicating isn't just, "Why is he gone?" It's, "I wish he'd just be honest with me, so I can finally be honest with myself."